Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do a book haul revisit for the month of November. It's been a busy month, and you can tell by the fact that we're halfway through November and I hadn't done my book haul revisit yet. It's almost time for me to do my book haul for the month. This is where I look back at past Novembers and see how many of the books that I brought into my library I have read, how many I would still like to read, and think about whether or not there are any I'd like to unhaul. I will also talk about anything that I have already unhauled. It's my way of trying to make myself a better book purchaser, holding myself accountable for the things that I bring into my library. And I like to think that it is making me a more intentional book purchaser and helping me understand how I read books a little bit better. That's the goal, at least. I don't know how successful I am in it, but that's the intention. Some quick notes before we begin. I am not including anything that I had already read at the time the book was purchased, because if that was the case, it's because I had read it and I brought it into my library because I genuinely wanted it to be there. It's a little bit different than purchasing a book with the intention to read it, so I've been leaving those out. I've also left out anything Sue Grafton, anything I purchased for my Pulitzer Prize project, things like that. It just helps move along through these book haul revisits a little bit faster, since we've got a couple of years to look at. We're going to start with the most recent November book haul, which is November of 2022, and we're going to work our way back to November of 2019, which was my first full year on book 2. That's the way we do things. So I am not going to spend a lot of time talking about what each of these books is about. If you want that information, I will have links to the original book haul video in the description box down below. I would encourage you to go there. It will have all the information that you would like about these books. So, without further ado, let's get going and start again with November of 2022. I brought 6 books into my library that qualify for this book haul revisit, and I will explain in a moment, because the first one that I brought into my library in November of last year was Foster by Claire Keegan. The reason I emphasized books that qualify is that the same month I actually brought Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, which is faced out on my shelf right here, into my library, but I had already read it. I had gotten it from my library and I loved it. And when Foster was released, I just decided, you know what, I would really like to have a copy of Small Things Like These. So it doesn't qualify for this book haul revisit. I'm just mentioning it because I loved it. So I have read Foster, which is good because it's a tiny little thing, as is Small Things Like These. And spoiler alert for my November book haul, which will be coming soon, I might have another Claire Keegan in the month of November coming. It's a nice little tradition. I hope this continues well into the future. So I did read Foster. I liked it, not as much as Small Things Like These, but that's a very high bar, and I really did like this one a lot. There is a film adaptation called The Quiet Girl, and it actually just popped up on Hulu. I am hoping to watch that sometime soon. But yes, I did read this. It was a success story, and I enjoyed it. The next one is something that I did read, but I actually unhauled. It's A Man Lay Dead by Ngaio Marsh. And then I also had gotten a copy of Enter a Murderer by Ngaio Marsh. So my neighbor had recommended the Ngaio Marsh books to me because I like those sort of classic whodunits in the sort of Agatha Christie style. So I read the first one, which was A Man Lay Dead, and the second one, which was Enter a Murderer, and I liked them. They're a little bit wild, very uneven, so I ultimately decided this is not a situation like Sue Grafton where I would like to collect all of the books and keep them in my library. This is probably a situation where I would maybe get new ones from the library, new, because these books have been out a long time. But I'd probably get them out from the library. If I see a used copy, I might get it and then just exchange it right back. So I did trade A Man Lay Dead and Enter a Murderer back in. Again, I read them. They were fine. I might continue on in the series, but a lot more carefully about purchasing and bringing them into the library, because they're definitely not something that I would like to have the entire set in my library, if that makes sense. Then I had gotten myself a copy of The Yellow Wallpaper and Other Stories by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and this is ridiculously tiny. Frankly, it is kind of ludicrous just how small it is. It's 69 pages, and again, it's not just one story. So The Yellow Wallpaper itself is only 15 pages. So you'd think I would have managed to fit this in, but I haven't, and I would still like to. I mean, it's not taking up any room on my shelf at all. And The Yellow Wallpaper is something that I have been feeling like I should read for a very long time. So I saw it in my local used bookstore and just grabbed it with the aspiration that at some point I would get to it. And I still have that intention at this point in time. Then we have The Town of Babylon by Alejandro Varela. Last year, this was a finalist for the National Book Award, and it was one of the books from that list that I really wanted to get around to reading. I have still not managed to do that, but I would still very much like to. I've heard good things about this book, and I would still like to get around to it. So there's that. And then The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida by Shehan Karunatilaka. This was the winner of the Booker Prize last year. And I think it had been scheduled for release in paperback in November. So that ended up being very fortuitously tied to when it won the Booker Prize. And I had ordered a copy from Montana Book Company. Here it is. I have not gotten around to reading it yet. I've heard a bit of mixed things, definitely skewing positive though. And I do still want to read this book. It sounds very quirky, inventive, kind of fun. So, although serious as well. So I would still like to read this book. It's not going to be going anywhere. So of the 6 books that qualify for this book haul revisit, I read 3. That's half. That's 50%. That's really good. And again, at least one of these books is only small. So hopefully I can squeeze this in at some point. And by the time we do a book haul revisit in November of 2024, I'll have another one crossed off my list from this one. And of those 6 books, I've only unhauled 2. The 2 that were unhauled were A Man Lay Dead and Enter a Murderer. But those were also 2 of the 3 books that I read. So all in all, not bad. Let's go back to November of 2021 and see how we fare there. The first book that I brought into my library in November of 2021 was Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. I had heard of this book, but it ended up winning the Young People's Literature Prize at the National Book Awards, which were done over Zoom that year. And Malinda Lo gave this really great speech, and I guess I kind of knew what the book was about, but I hadn't really paid attention to it. But it was really her acceptance speech at the National Book Awards that made me say, I need to get a copy of this book. So I did, and I read it. So success story. And I really like this book. You never see it in my videos because it's on a shelf that's a little too low. It's the bottom shelf. So, you can see this shelf, and then there's one underneath. So it's faced out like right under there. You just don't really get to see it. But I did read this book. I liked it. I would recommend it. There has been a sort of quasi-sequel to this book that has been released, which I have not gotten around to yet, and I would still very much like to. So that's Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. Then we have a graphic novel adaptation of a book that I have read. So the book is Work Like Any Other by Virginia Reeves. This is Work Like Any Other by Alex W. Inker, inspired by Virginia Reeves' novel. So I have not gotten around to reading this yet. I would still like to. I liked Work Like Any Other, and just kind of really intrigued me that they adapted it into a graphic novel. So I will be getting around to it at some point. So this is actually, it was done in France, and then there was an English translation of it. So looking forward to this at some point. It's a graphic novel, so it should read pretty quickly. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And then the only other book from the November of 2021 book haul that qualifies here is Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. So I have not gotten around to reading this. Joel did listen to this on audio and didn't have a great time of it. We talked to Abby at Montana Book Company, who is the person who actually recommended this. And she said this is not a book that you can really adequately do on audio because there are footnotes and the book is better, according to her. So Joel hasn't gone back and read the book. I have heard a lot of really mixed things about it over the last year. So I am sort of pondering if I'm going to get around to this book. It's a chunky little thing. And given the mixed response that Joel had from the audio and some other things that I've really heard about this book, and I know that the audio was not the way to go with this, but I have sort of thought about whether or not I should let this one go and trade it in, because the fact that I've been hearing so many mixed things about this book is definitely making it sink lower and lower on my priority list. So we're not in the danger zone right now, but there is, some concern about whether or not this is anything that I would ever eventually get to. So if you have read Plain Bad Heroines by Emily Danforth, let me know what you thought of it in the description box, or not the description box, in the comment section down below, because I am sort of thinking it takes up a lot of space on my shelf, and I'm starting to wonder if this is real estate that I could give to something else. Because at this point, with the mixed things that I've been hearing about it over the last year, I just don't know if it's something that I'm going to get around to. But it did sound interesting, and I have read Emily M. Danforth's other book, which was The Miseducation of Cameron Post. So let me know what you thought of this if you have read it. It's not in danger now, but could be in danger at some point in the future. So of the 3 books that qualify for this book haul revisit from November of 2021, I've only read one, and that was Last Night at the Telegraph Club. But I haven't unhauled anything, and there's only one that has an inkling of being unhauled at some time in the future. So let's go to November of 2020, which was a big one, as you can tell, because I'm struggling to get all of the books here. The first book that I hauled that month is something that I'm not going to say the title of, because one time, a while ago, one of my videos was flagged by YouTube for language, which was interesting because it was a video that I didn't even say a curse word in. So ever since then, I have been very careful not to curse in videos, even though I do curse in real life. I just try not to do it because I definitely got scared by that. It was easy enough. I just appealed it, someone reviewed it, and took the strike off of my channel. But yeah, it was not fun. So I don't curse in the videos. So I'm just going to hold this up and let you read the title for yourself. This is by Alison Bechdel. It's graphic. It's not really a graphic novel. So Alison Bechdel, who wrote Fun Home, rose to fame with this comic strip. And they finally compiled them into this book. I'm trying to keep talking, but I'm dropping. The books are in danger of falling in my lap, so let me just adjust those really quickly and jump back. So they finally compiled them, and I purchased it, and I thought it was okay. It feels dated when you read it now, but that's fine. You know, I enjoyed it. It definitely is sort of like a time capsule to what it was like to be a lesbian in the 90s, and that is certainly worth experiencing. But, you know, I have struggled with Alison Bechdel's work other than Fun Home, being honest. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, very up and down. And, I love Fun Home enough that I'm still interested in a lot of that she does. But there you go. Next was A Promised Land by Barack Obama. I have not read this. And you know what? I'm starting to realize at this point, Joel did listen to this on audio. And this is one thing I've learned from book haul revisits. I am much more likely to read a nonfiction book on audio. Joel listened to the audio, which is narrated by Barack Obama, of course, because how would you get anyone else to narrate a book by Barack Obama? I mean, it would just be appalling if he didn't read it himself. So if I do ever read this, it's going to be through the audio. In the meantime, it's taking up a lot of space on my shelf. I would feel bad getting rid of this, though. So I'm not really crunched for space in the nonfiction area behind me. So it's going to stick around. Maybe I'll get around to it at some point. But if I do, it's definitely going to be the audio. So this is not something I'm really thinking about unhauling necessarily, unless I really get crunched for space. Because I know if and when I read this book, and as time goes on, the likelihood that I will read it is getting lower and lower, it would be on audio. So do I need to keep this real estate? I don't know. We'll see. It's not in any danger right now because I don't need the space over in nonfiction, but, you know, there could come a day when there would be a bit of danger around that. Next, we have Memorial by Brian Washington. And this I have not read. I had read Brian Washington's story collection, which was produced before this. I think it was called Lot, and I really didn't respond to it. To me, it felt like sort of like an MFA project. That sounds like a very mean thing to say, but that was the feel to me. And this was his first novel. I've heard really good things about it, so I should get over myself and read this. But I just really didn't have a good experience with Lot. Someday I do want to get around to reading this, and I tell myself I will. But I don't have any immediate plans to get to it. And this is also a situation where as time goes on, the likelihood that I will get to it seems to be getting smaller and smaller. But I've heard a lot of really good things about this book, so I am going to hold on to it with the hope that someday I will get to it. Then I found a copy of Appointment in Samara by John O'Hara. John O'Hara was a very popular writer in his day, which is approaching 100 years ago, which is wild. Actually, when was this published? This book, copyright 1934, was frequently cited as one of the best books of last century, and for that reason, I had always kind of thought about reading it. I just never had a copy. So when I saw one in my local used bookstore, I just snatched it up. So this is still something that I would like to read. I talked about it a bit when I did a Pulitzer Prize deep dive. It was released the same year as Now in November, I believe. And I haven't read it, so I can't really say if it would have been competitive. It was not a finalist that year. I think it definitely would have been too scandalous at the time it was published. So it would never have won. But I was kind of curious to read it just so I could compare as a reader with, a modern perspective on things. But it definitely wouldn't have won because it would have been considered too shocking when it was originally published. But it is a book that is definitely appreciated as good literature now. I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet, and I would still like to do that at some point. That takes us to The Adventures of Augie March by Saul Bellow. I used to have one of the Penguin Great Books of the 20th Century editions, which are beautiful, of this book, and somewhere along the way it disappeared from my library. I moved a bunch of times since then, and things have a way of sort of disappearing from there. Anyway, I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I would still like to. Saul Bellow is a Pulitzer author for his book Humboldt's Gift, and I found this, I just kind of love this 80s looking cover of the paperback, so that's kind of a delight. It is not something that I have immediate plans to read. It's definitely a library builder, sort of aspirational book purchasing, like someday I will get around to reading this. It's not in any danger of going anywhere. Then we have 2 Agatha Christie novels. Technically there were 3 because I purchased and then there were none, but I had already read it and knew that I liked it. The ones that I had not read were The Seven Dials Mystery and Death on the Nile. I subsequently read Death on the Nile, have not gotten to The Seven Dials Mystery, which I'm really curious about because it is... So Death on the Nile is a Poirot mystery, and I'm not a huge fan of the Poirot books, being honest. I'm more of a Marple fan. So this is not Poirot or Marple, so I'm kind of looking forward to giving that a try at some point. So of the 7 books that I brought into my library in November of 2020, I have read 2, and I haven't unhauled anything yet. So that's good news. Nothing's been unhauled. And there are some books in here, like I don't know when I'll get to Memorial. I don't know when I will get to A Promised Land. But, it's fine. They're not in any danger of going anywhere yet. Let's see how things go in the future. Maybe even if I don't have a crunch for space in my library at this time next year, at some point I will kind of have to ask the question of am I going to read this? Do I want to keep it? But not now. Not now. The final year for our November book haul revisit is November of 2019. I brought 4 books into my library that month. And I'll just tell you up front, 2 of them are gone because we're going to talk about the first 2 immediately. The first is The Great Pretender by Susanna Cahalan. And I just thought about this one over time and realized if I'm going to read it, I'm much more likely to do it on audio. And I don't have any... This was when I was a member of Book of the Month Club, so I got it because I had a credit and I figured I might as well use it. And that's why I'm not a member of Book of the Month anymore, because a lot of books that I unhauled over time, which I've realized as I do these book haul revisits, were things that I got just because I was a member of Book of the Month Club and felt like I needed to use a credit. So I'm not living that life anymore. The next one was The Fountains of Silence by Ruth Sepetys, and I still am interested in reading that book, but last year I was having a huge crunch for space on my shelves, which is why we expanded the library and added more shelves in January of this year. And I had to make some tough calls. So I reached out to Doris at Aldi Books and asked if she had read it. And I think she had, I can't remember if she had read it or not. I think she had, but her wisdom on it was that there was a different book by Sepetys that I could prioritize. And she said, you would totally be fine listening to that on audio. You don't need to have the book. So I let that be my guide, and I brought it in and traded it. So it's gone. So the first two have not been read and are gone. It's fine. And now we get to the books I still have. The first is Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. So this dates back to when she was longlisted and then shortlisted and then co-won the Booker Prize. I read Girl, Woman, Other and was interested in her backlist. And as soon as I saw Mr. Loverman in her backlist, I was like, I need a copy of that book. So I ordered it, and here it is. And I have not gotten around to reading it. I'm actually incredibly shocked that I have not managed to read this book since November of 2019. That's a long time. And this is a book that is perfectly suited to my interests as a reader. So how have I not read this? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. If you asked me to pick the book that I have not read yet that surprises me the most, it would be Mr. Loverman. So hopefully 2024 will be the year that I finally get around to reading Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. It's not going anywhere because I really want to read it. And I've heard good things about it. So hopefully at some point I will be getting around to that. The final book from November of 2019 was Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I did read this. I did a buddy read with Amelia Reeves, who's a commenter. And I absolutely love this book. I think it's actually my favorite Toni Morrison book, and that says a lot because Toni Morrison is one of my favorite writers. If not my favorite writer, I don't even know anymore. I don't know. But I absolutely loved this book. It's really fantastic and just a delight. I mean, it's difficult, like all Toni Morrison books are, because of the subject matter, because the way it's structured is very dense. We did our buddy read, Amelia Reeves and I, chapter by chapter and then checked in, and that was a very helpful way of structuring it for me, but I absolutely loved that book. So of those 4 books from November of 2019, I only read one, Song of Solomon, and 2 of them have been unhauled. One of those I would probably still seek out and read, and that was Fountains of Silence, although Doris, if I remember correctly, pointed me toward a different book by that same author. So altogether, I got 20 books that I brought into my library that qualify for this book haul revisit. I've only read 7. That's not quite half, but we're working our way in that direction. There are still a lot of books in here that I want to read, some books that I don't have immediate plans to get to, like The Adventures of Augie March or Appointment in Samara, things like that, that I don't have immediate plans to get to, but I'm happy to have in my library. So all in all, this is a mostly successful book haul with what I have left. And I've only unhauled 4 out of the 20 books. 2 of them had been read when they were unhauled. And really, there are only maybe 2 books that I would think about unhauling in the future. So all in all, not bad. If you have feedback or thoughts about any of the books that I've talked about here, let me know in the comment section down below. You'll be getting my November book haul very soon. And again, spoiler alert, there's probably a Claire Keegan. And it's going to be really big. There was a library sale. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, as always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.